Welcome to Mr. Kelin Stories. How's everyone doing today? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. In today's video, we have an incredible emotional story that will truly inspire you. Meet Jack Stevens, a successful CEO who, after a long day of meetings, accidentally walks into the wrong hotel room. What he doesn't expect is to find Maya, a talented artist, in the middle of a personal moment. As Maya steps into the bathroom to take a shower, Jack is left standing in the room, unsure of what to do next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another heartwarming story like this one. Let's dive in. Jack Stevens, the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies on the East Coast, was used to business trips. They were routine, almost like clockwork. He had spent most of his career hopping from city to city, from meeting to meeting, always racing against time. But tonight in Los Angeles, things felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the non-stop presentations, or the weight of the deals that were yet to be signed. Maybe it was just the overwhelming pressure to constantly succeed. Jack had worked hard to build his company, to reach the top, but the last few years had been relentless. The travel, the stress, the endless expectations, it had all started to wear him down. For once, Jack was looking forward to a night of peace, a few hours to unwind and escape from the relentless cycle of work that consumed him. His assistant had already arranged everything. The flight, the conference, the hotel reservation, everything was taken care of. All he had to do was check in, go up to his room, and let his mind rest. As he entered the luxurious hotel lobby in downtown Los Angeles, the gleaming glass walls reflecting the orange glow of the sunset, Jack couldn't help but sigh. The hotel was beautiful, high-end, with plush carpets and marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The kind of place that screamed luxury and success. The kind of place he deserved after years of hard work. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about luxury. All he wanted was to forget about the conference and the investors waiting for him the next day. "Mr. Stevens, welcome to the Skyline Hotel," the front desk attendant greeted him warmly, handing him a sleek keycard. "Your room is on the 12th floor, room 1213. Jack smiled, nodding his thanks. He wasn't in the mood for small talk. His thoughts were already drifting to what he would do once he got to his room. A hot shower, maybe some Netflix to unwind, and then he'd try to get some sleep before another busy day tomorrow. He didn't want to think about work. He didn't want to think about anything at all. He rode the elevator up to the 12th floor, pressing the button for his floor absent-mindedly. The quiet hum of the elevator was the only sound, and for a moment it felt like the world had slowed down. The day had been long and tiring, but he was almost there, almost to his haven of peace. As the doors slid open on the 12th floor, Jack stepped out, glancing at the room numbers along the hallway. 1213. There it was, just a few steps down the corridor. He walked toward the door, feeling his tired muscles relax as he approached. With a deep breath, he swiped the keycard and turned the handle, pushing open the door. But what he didn't expect, what he couldn't have predicted, was that this simple act of entering his room would change everything. Jack froze in place as soon as he stepped inside. His eyes widened, his heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected anyone to be in the room. The last thing he was prepared for was an encounter that would throw him completely off balance. There, in the center of the room, stood a woman, her back to him, seemingly unaware of his presence. The first thing he noticed was the calm aura she exuded, something tranquil, yet inexplicably intense. She was facing the window, her figure silhouetted against the dim glow of the city lights outside. Her hair, dark and slightly damp, cascaded down her back in soft waves. The room, which was supposed to be his sanctuary, felt almost foreign. There was an emotional weight hanging in the air, as if it carried a story, one that Jack wasn't prepared to unravel. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Did he leave? Was this a mistake? He had been given room 1213. But could this woman have mistakenly entered his room? And if so, why wasn't she panicking like he was? Why was she so still? He cleared his throat awkwardly, stepping inside. "Excuse me, I think there's been a mix-up," Jack said, his voice unsure, laced with confusion. The woman turned slowly, as if it took her a moment to realize someone had entered. The soft sound of her footsteps echoed through the quiet room as she faced him. Her eyes met his for just a brief second, and Jack could feel the tension between them, like an electric current. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly as she spoke. Jack's mind raced. Was this some kind of hotel mix-up? He had the key to the room. The key worked fine. Was this some sort of mistake on the hotel's part? But her words, there was something about the way she spoke, the vulnerability in her tone, that made him pause. "I'm sorry," Jack stammered, his heart pounding as he took a step back, fumbling with the door. "I think I entered the wrong room. My key worked." But before he could finish, the woman took a few more steps toward him, her gaze still soft, yet filled with a quiet sadness. "It's all right, I wasn't expecting anyone." She wiped a tear from her cheek, her fingers trembling slightly as she did so. Jack, feeling a strange mix of guilt and confusion, stayed where he was, still unsure of how to react. What was going on here? Why did it feel like something was wrong, like he had stumbled into something far deeper than just a room mix-up? "I didn't mean to intrude," Jack said, his voice now more gentle. "I thought this was my room, but I see I'm in the wrong place. I'll leave." But as he started to turn, he couldn't help but notice the sadness in her eyes. He felt a pull, a sense of responsibility, an urge to stay. Something in him knew that walking away wasn't the right choice. Jack's heart was still racing as he stepped out of the elevator, the soft hum of the moving car still reverberating in his ears. His tired eyes, heavy from the long day of meetings and the endless pressure to perform, scanned the hallway. The polished floors of the hotel gleamed under the soft lighting, their reflections stretching out like ribbons of warmth across the corridor. He could almost taste the anticipation of quiet solitude, the one thing he craved more than anything right now. It had been a busy, draining day, and Jack was looking forward to nothing more than collapsing into a comfortable bed and escaping into his thoughts. He walked toward room 1213, the number printed in neat black letters on the door. As he approached, Jack noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack. Nothing extreme, but enough for him to feel a little unsure. He had stayed in countless hotels, but never had he experienced this tiny sense of doubt, of something not quite right. A slight furrow formed between Jack's brows, and he stepped forward, his fingers reaching out instinctively toward the door. He hadn't heard anyone knock, no sounds of footsteps or movement coming from inside. Was it possible the maid had forgotten to close it properly? Maybe the cleaning staff had just left for the day. His curiosity tugged at him, though part of him was still too exhausted to care about a minor inconvenience. With a soft push, Jack eased the door open. The sound of the latch clicking was faint, but it somehow made the moment feel oddly amplified. And then, as the door swung wide, Jack was hit with a sense of surprise. It wasn't what he expected. Not at all. The room inside wasn't the bright, sterile environment he had grown accustomed to in luxury hotels. Bright lights, clinical whiteness, and a scent of antiseptic. No, this was different. The room felt intimate. It was dimly lit, bathed in the soft glow of a low-wattage lamp. The golden light flickered gently against the walls, casting long shadows that danced and twisted in the corners. It was warm, inviting, as if someone had intentionally created a cozy, almost personal atmosphere. A A soft, calming scent of lavender seemed to fill the air. And for a moment Jack found himself distracted by the unexpected comfort. It was almost as if he had walked into a space designed for serenity. It felt like someone's sanctuary, a safe haven that had been carefully crafted to bring peace. It made him pause, and despite his exhaustion, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. His guard was down in that single moment, but that fleeting sense of tranquility quickly evaporated as his eyes moved toward the bathroom doorway. There she was. Standing near the bathroom, her back to him, a woman was preparing to step into the shower. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, slightly damp, as if she had already washed part of her body. The simple motion of her preparing to step into the water seemed graceful, like the movements of someone in their own world, their own private space. She hadn't noticed him yet, and for a brief moment, Jack felt like an intruder. But it wasn't just that. There was something else in the air, something deeper. His breath caught in his throat. The room, the woman, the moment. It all seemed to hang in the air like an unfinished story, something waiting to unfold. He felt like he had wandered into a scene from a dream, but the dream was quickly becoming a nightmare. He stood frozen in place, unable to move. His heart began to beat faster, but he wasn't sure if it was out of shock or the growing realization that something was terribly wrong. Was this a mistake? Had the hotel somehow given him the wrong room? Had someone gotten the wrong idea, and now he was trespassing in someone else's privacy? Jack blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. His eyes were trained on the woman's back, but he didn't know whether to speak or leave. The tension in the room was palpable, thick and heavy, as if the air itself was charged with unspoken emotions. The room itself seemed to have a life, alive with subtle details, like the soft perfume that filled the air, the dim lighting, the distant hum of the city far below. His mind raced. Was this a setup? Was someone playing a joke on him? Or worse, had he walked into a private space he wasn't supposed to be in? How could he have been so careless, so absent-minded? Still, something tugged at him, a part of him that felt deeply concerned, even protective. It was as if the woman, standing there in her own little world, was unaware of the stranger who had entered her sanctuary, her most vulnerable moment. And yet, there was a subtle strength in the way she held herself, a quiet resilience. She was clearly unaware of his presence, but Jack couldn't ignore the vulnerability she exuded. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, and he felt his palms beginning to sweat. He knew he had to leave, to turn and walk away. He had no business being here. This wasn't his room. This was a mistake, one that would be so easy to rectify. Just step back, apologize, and leave. And yet, something kept him rooted to the spot. The woman's back remained to him, and for a split second the room was still. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but it was as though he knew something needed to be said, something needed to break the silence. Then, as if the spell had been broken, the woman shifted slightly, her shoulders stiffening as she became aware of his presence. Slowly, she turned, her face meeting his gaze, her eyes wide with surprise, and then, almost immediately, a veil of caution. It was in that moment that Jack realized this wasn't just a random hotel mix-up. There was something deeper here, something he couldn't yet understand. Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of confusion and surprise, but also a quiet sorrow. She looked at him like he had intruded on something fragile, something that had been carefully protected. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered, her voice soft, almost trembling. There was an edge to her words, fragile, like a cracked porcelain vase that could shatter at any moment. Her eyes told a different story, though, a story of someone who had already been hurt, someone who had been let down too many times to count. Jack's heart thudded in his chest. He had no idea what to say. How could he explain that this was an honest mistake? How could he explain the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him? This was no longer just a simple hotel room mix-up. It was something far more significant, something unspoken, something that felt like a turning point. "I'm sorry," Jack muttered, his voice thick with confusion. "I didn't mean to intrude. I thought this was my room." The woman gave him a faint, almost defeated smile, her gaze still wary, but her posture softening slightly as if she realized he wasn't a threat. "It's all right," she said quietly, her voice distant. "I wasn't expecting anyone." She took a small step back, as if preparing to retreat into herself, into her world of solitude. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The room, still dimly lit with the scent of lavender, held them in a delicate silence. Jack wasn't sure what to do. He could leave, he could just walk out of the door, apologize, and pretend this had never happened. But something in the air, something in the way she had spoken, held him there. "You should go," the woman said softly, her voice barely a whisper now. Jack's hand was still gripping the door handle, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something deep within told him this moment wasn't just a mistake, it was a moment of significance. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew in that quiet room something was waiting to unfold. And so Jack Stevens, the CEO, stood there, heart racing, mind in turmoil, unsure of what would come next, but certain that his night had just taken a turn he could never have predicted. Jack froze in place, his mind working furiously as his gaze lingered on the woman in front of him. There was a moment of stunned silence, a moment when the world itself seemed to pause and hold its breath, unsure of what would happen next. His body stood still, but his heart was racing, a sudden adrenaline rush that made his palms sweat, his breath quicken. He had just stepped into the wrong room, but this was no ordinary mistake. No, there was something far more significant at play here, something deep, something unspoken. As he watched, the woman slowly turned to face him. Her movements were deliberate, almost hesitant, as if unsure how to respond. The expression on her face was a mixture of surprise and composure. Despite the shock of the situation, she seemed strangely calm. Her features were soft, and there was a quiet sadness in her eyes that Jack couldn't place. Her beauty was not the kind that demanded attention, but rather the kind that felt natural and understated, like the kind of beauty that grew know you the more you looked. She didn't look frightened, but Jack could see the wariness in the way she held herself, her posture guarded but not defensive. She took a slow step toward the towel hanging on the bathroom door, reaching out to grab it, her fingers trembling just slightly as they brushed against the fabric. Jack noticed the way she moved, graceful, but there was something fragile about it, like she was holding herself together in a way that only someone who had been through something difficult could. "Excuse me." Her voice broke through the silence, shaking just a little, but still surprisingly steady. She turned toward him, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "You're in the wrong room." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jack felt his stomach churn, his face flushed with embarrassment, his throat tightened as he stammered, unable to find the right words. His hands instinctively moved to the door handle, and he stepped back, his heart thundering in his chest. "I'm so sorry," Jack managed to say, his voice thick with regret. "I thought this was my room. I didn't mean to intrude." The apology felt hollow, almost inadequate. What could he say to make this situation better? How could he take back the moment of discomfort he had just caused? He had come to this hotel expecting nothing more than peace and quiet, but now he had intruded on someone else's world. This woman, this stranger, was no longer just an innocent hotel guest. She was someone with her own life, her own struggles, and in that moment, Jack realized that he had disrupted something far more personal than a simple mix-up. He took another step back, his eyes still locked on hers. He felt like an intruder, not just into a physical space, but into her emotional world. There was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, an aura of strength that made Jack feel even more out of place. She wasn't angry or upset, but there was a quiet sorrow in her gaze. Her expression was one of quiet resignation, as though she had grown accustomed to moments of discomfort, moments like this, where she had to face things she didn't want to. But before he could turn to leave, to escape the suffocating tension in the room, the woman spoke again. Her voice was softer this time, but there was something more in her tone, a vulnerability that Jack hadn't expected. She didn't seem to be angry, but there was a weariness in her words that tugged at his heart. "Wait," she said, her hand coming up slightly as if to stop him. "It's all right. I wasn't expecting anyone, but it's fine." Jack hesitated, his mind racing. He was so close to walking out of the room, so close to escaping the awkwardness of the situation, but there was something in her voice, something that pulled him back. Her words were kind, but they didn't quite mask the sadness that lingered beneath them. He couldn't help but notice how she had let her guard down, just a little, in that brief moment. She wasn't demanding that he leave immediately. She wasn't rushing him out the door. Instead, she was offering him an invitation to stay in the space she had created for herself. It wasn't a literal invitation to remain in the room, but an unspoken one, an invitation into her world, a world that Jack had, unknowingly, barged into. "I really didn't mean to intrude," Jack said again, his voice softer now. He found himself standing still, the door half open behind him, the cool air of the hallway making him feel more exposed. There was a quiet, almost sacred space between them now, and Jack couldn't bring himself to leave just yet. Not when he could see the fragility in her eyes, the quiet pain that seemed to hang in the air. The woman's eyes softened just a little, as if she could sense the regret and empathy in his words. She glanced away for a moment, looking toward the bathroom door before her gaze returned to Jack. There was a brief pause, one that stretched far longer than it should have, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. "It's all right," she repeated, but this time there was a note of something else in her voice, something gentler, something that made Jack feel like he wasn't completely unwelcome. "It's just, I've had a lot on my mind lately. I didn't expect someone to walk in like that." Jack nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. He could sense that this wasn't just about the hotel mix-up. There was something deeper here, something that went beyond a simple mistake. He wanted to apologize, to say something that would make it right, but he wasn't sure what could possibly heal the invisible wound he had just stumbled upon. For a moment, they stood there, just looking at each other. Jack's gaze softened as he saw her step back from the bathroom doorway, wrapping the towel around herself with slow, deliberate movements. Her shoulders were tense, but she was trying so hard to hold it together, to keep her composure. The vulnerability she had revealed in that moment was something Jack would never forget. It was as if she had allowed him a glimpse into a part of her soul that she rarely showed anyone. "I really am sorry," Jack said once more, his voice filled with a sincerity that was more than just an apology for the mistake. It was an apology for the intrusion, for not recognizing that the room he had stepped into wasn't just a space. It was part of someone's life, part of their story. The woman's eyes softened again, the sadness lingering in them. But there was a quiet acceptance now. "You don't have to apologize anymore," she said, her voice calmer now. "It's just, I've been through a lot lately. I've been trying to find some peace in the quiet. It's hard when things feel out of control." Jack's chest tightened at her words. There was so much unsaid, so much pain beneath the surface, and he realized that he had unknowingly walked into that. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just an awkward moment. This was something that had the potential to change him, something that could open his eyes to the world outside of his own. "I understand," Jack said quietly, his voice thick with empathy. "I really do." The silence in the room deepened, but it wasn't as uncomfortable now. It felt more like an understanding, a mutual recognition that life wasn't always neat or controlled. Sometimes things slipped through the cracks, and we found ourselves in situations we never expected. And in that moment, Jack realized that this was not just a mistake. It was a reminder that everyone, even those who seemed to have it all together, was struggling in their own way. And maybe, just maybe, it was his turn to learn how to truly listen, to hear the unspoken stories that lay beneath the surface of those around him. Jack's pulse was still quick, his heartbeat pounding in his ears as the woman's words echoed in the air, sharp but quiet. "It's all right. I'm sure you didn't mean to," she said softly. But the sadness that lingered in her eyes told a different story. Her voice cracked slightly, a subtle tremor in the words that made Jack's stomach twist uncomfortably. He could see it now, the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders were hunched ever so slightly, as if carrying some invisible weight. Jack, caught between his desire to retreat and an unexpected impulse to stay, felt like an intruder. His presence in the room, though entirely unintentional, was almost suffocating to him now. It wasn't just that he had walked into the wrong room. No, it was something deeper, something intangible that hung in the air between them. A quiet pain, something that neither of them had yet acknowledged, but that neither could ignore. He had come here expecting to relax, expecting to return to the normalcy of his busy life, but instead he was standing in a stranger's private moment, in the midst of a quiet turmoil that he could feel without truly understanding it. She looked at him again, her eyes softening just a fraction. "But you should go," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had spoken directly about what was happening, the need for space. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of guilt wash over him, mixed with the awareness that as much as he hadn't meant to intrude, he had done so nonetheless. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He could feel the weight of her request. He could feel the invisible walls around her, a boundary she had drawn without a word, and yet it was so apparent in the way she stood, in the way she wrapped the towel around her body like a shield. It was clear that she was retreating into herself, creating a quiet fortress to protect whatever it was she was hiding behind that fragile barrier. But before Jack could retreat, before he could turn on his heel and leave as quickly as he had entered, something unexpected happened. The woman took a small step forward, her movements deliberate but measured. Her eyes met his once more, and there was something in the way she looked at him that made Jack's heart twist, a sadness, a weariness that spoke volumes in the silence. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing him. No, it was something deeper, something unspoken that was begging to be acknowledged. "Please," she said quietly, the words hanging between them like a fragile thread. "I just need some space. I've had a rough day." Her voice was softer now, almost pleading. The tremor in her tone was enough to break through the shell of confusion and guilt that had kept Jack rooted to the spot. Something about those words, something about the vulnerability in her voice made him feel like he had crossed a line, but it was one that he hadn't meant to step over. For a moment, Jack just stood there, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to fix what seemed to be an irreparable mistake. His chest tightened as the weight of her words settled in. She was asking for space, but it wasn't just physical space. He could feel that. No, it was something more. She was asking for emotional distance, for the freedom to breathe, to retreat into herself after whatever had caused her distress. The room felt thick with her unspoken plea, and Jack found himself frozen, caught between his desire to respect her wishes and an overwhelming need to understand what she was going through. His gaze softened, and before he realized it, he found himself taking a step back into the room. It wasn't that he wanted to push her boundaries. It was that something in him, some unspoken understanding, told him that he couldn't walk away just yet. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't ignore the need to understand her, to see beyond the surface and into the quiet ache she was carrying. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, the question coming out before he could even think about it. His voice was low, sincere, filled with the vulnerability of someone who recognized that sometimes we all need a little help, whether we admit it or not. He immediately regretted his words. Who was he to ask such a personal question? He didn't know her. He didn't know her story. But something in her energy, something in the way she had spoken to him urged him to ask. It wasn't just the mix-up in the hotel room anymore. No, it was something far deeper, a need to connect, to listen. The woman didn't answer right away, and for a few seconds the room was filled only with the sound of their breathing, each of them processing the weight of the moment. Her gaze flickered toward the floor as if she was searching for the right words, or perhaps trying to collect herself before speaking. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with a quiet steadiness. I don't really know," she finally said, her voice quiet, as though she was speaking more to herself than to him. "I guess I'm just tired. Tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. Tired of carrying all this weight by myself." Her words hit Jack like a wave, each one an unraveling of something raw and real that she had been keeping hidden beneath the surface. Her honesty was unexpected, her willingness to share a part of her inner world with him, someone who had no place in it, took him by surprise. The heaviness in her voice, the vulnerability in her admission, made Jack realize how much she had been holding back, how much she had been trying to protect herself from whatever pain lay beneath the calm exterior. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate slightly, though the air was still thick with unspoken emotions. Jack could see it now, the quiet battle that she had been fighting. The exhaustion in her posture wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Her shoulders were hunched, not because of the weight of the towel around her, but because of the weight of everything she'd been carrying on her own. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she added, her voice breaking slightly, as if the words had slipped out without her realizing it. She glanced at him again, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's just, everything's been piling up, and it feels like it's all crashing down at once. Sometimes I just need to escape it, even if it's just for a little while." Jack stood there listening to her, and for the first time he felt like he wasn't just standing in a hotel room anymore. He wasn't just an intruder in someone's private space. No, this was something far deeper. This was a shared moment of understanding, two strangers caught in the intersection of pain and vulnerability. "I don't know what you've been through," Jack said softly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "But I do know that you don't have to carry it all alone." Her eyes met his again, and for the first time, Jack saw something shift, something like hope, flickering behind the sadness. She didn't say anything immediately, but the faintest of smiles touched the corner of her lips, as if she were trying to express gratitude without the words. There was no magic solution to the pain she was feeling. Jack couldn't fix it. He couldn't make it all better, but in that moment he understood something profound. Sometimes all someone needs is a little recognition, a little compassion, a moment of understanding. And for the first time since he had walked into the wrong room, Jack felt like maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Maya's sigh seemed to fill the room, carrying with it the weight of unspoken thoughts, burdens she had been carrying in silence. She lowered herself onto the bed, her shoulders slumping just a little, as though the act of sitting down allowed the weight of the world to press down on her, even further. The towel wrapped tightly around her body seemed to hold her together in that moment, as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. For a brief moment Maya didn't speak. She simply stared at the floor, her gaze distant and far away, as if lost in memories that were too painful to face. Jack, sensing that the silence was not one of discomfort, but of introspection, didn't interrupt. He stood a little farther away, respecting the space she had asked for earlier, but feeling a strange pull to remain, to listen. The world outside the hotel room, her reality, his reality, felt so distant now. All that mattered was the conversation they were sharing, the connection that was forming between them in this intimate moment. Finally, Maya's voice broke the silence. It was softer now, like a gentle whisper, but there was a rawness to it that made Jack's heart ache. "My name is Maya," she said, meeting his gaze briefly before lowering her eyes again. "I came here to present my art at a gallery." She paused, and Jack could see the flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps hope, perhaps fear. But whatever it was, it quickly faded as she continued. "But it didn't go as I hoped." Jack's brow furrowed, his curiosity piqued. He had no idea where this conversation would go, but he could tell it was something important, something that had shaped the woman sitting in front of him, a woman whose pain seemed so tangible it almost seemed to wrap itself around him as well. "I'm an artist," Maya continued, her voice a little stronger now, though still tinged with the sadness that had taken root in her soul. "I've spent years perfecting my work. I've poured my heart and soul into my paintings, my sculptures. Everything I create is a piece of me. I thought I'd finally be recognized, finally be able to prove myself. I thought this gallery was going to be my breakthrough, the moment when everything would change." Jack, sensing the depth of Maya's words, nodded slowly, urging her to continue. He had never really thought much about art, certainly never in the way she was describing it. But the raw emotion in her voice made him realize that for Maya, this was far more than just a passion. It was her life, her identity. Her art was a reflection of her, of everything she had worked toward and fought for. And now, that dream seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Maya inhaled deeply, steadying herself as though she were trying to gather her thoughts into some semblance of order. Her hands, which had been resting in her lap, slowly clenched into fists. Her knuckles whitened, but she didn't seem to notice. "When I got to the gallery," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "I was met with rejection. Not because my art wasn't good. At least, I don't think so. It wasn't about my work. It was about who I am. They dismissed my art simply because of my skin color." The words hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. He had never known the weight of such a statement. The sting of being rejected for something you couldn't change, something that was beyond your control. Maya's story unfolded before him like a tragedy he hadn't been prepared for, and Jack realized, for the first time in his life, that this was not just about art. It was about something much deeper, something that touched on the very core of who she was, something that society had decided to overlook or dismiss simply because of her appearance. "I had worked so hard," Maya continued, her voice wavering now, as if the emotions she had been holding back were finally spilling over. "Years of sacrifices. I gave up so much, all for a chance to be recognized, to be seen. But instead, I was told that my art wasn't authentic enough because it came from someone who didn't look the way they expected." She paused, as if the weight of those words still had the power to crush her. "They told me my work wasn't real, that it was just another ethnic piece of work that wasn't worthy of being shown alongside other artists." Jack's heart dropped as he processed what Maya was saying. He had heard of such things, racism, prejudice, but hearing it from someone he was beginning to care about, hearing her recount the painful rejection, made it real in a way he hadn't expected. To think that someone's life, someone's dreams, could be defined by something so arbitrary, so cruel, it made him sick to his stomach. "They told me I was too much of something, too dark, too foreign, too other to belong," Maya whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I thought I was finally going to break through to show them that it wasn't about my skin or where I came from. It was about the art, about the message behind it. But they didn't care. They just saw the color of my skin and decided that wasn't enough to make my art real. Jack felt a knot form in his chest. He had been blind to the reality of discrimination in art, in life. But now, listening to Maya's story, he couldn't deny the hurt and the injustice of it. It made him angry, not just at the gallery owners, but at a society that made room for some, but excluded others based on the color of their skin. It was a reminder of how far the world still had to go, how much work remained to be done to create a space where everyone could thrive regardless of who they were. Maya's voice faltered again, and Jack could see that the weight of her story was finally catching up to her. It wasn't just about the rejection, it was about everything that had led her to that moment. It was about the years of effort, the dreams she had built, only to have them torn apart in an instant. "I don't know what to do anymore," Maya said, the vulnerability in her voice almost too much for Jack to bear. "I feel like everything I've worked for doesn't matter, like I'm not good enough, no matter how hard I try. It's like they just see me for what I look like, not who I am. And it's so exhausting, you know, constantly fighting to be seen, to be heard, and still being rejected." Jack could feel the weight of her words. The hurt in her voice was something he couldn't ignore. He had never known what it was like to be judged for something as unchangeable as your skin color. But now, as Maya spoke, he felt the sting of her pain, and he knew, deep down, that this was a battle that should never have been hers to fight in the first place. The room seemed to fall silent as Maya paused, taking a deep breath. Jack felt a sense of helplessness wash over him, unsure of how to make it better. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the hurt she had experienced. But he could be here now, in this moment, offering her something the gallery had never offered her: understanding, compassion, the simple recognition that her dreams were worth something. She was worth something. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You're more than your skin color, Maya. Your art is more than just a product of where you come from, and you deserve to be seen, to be heard. You've worked too hard to let anyone tell you that your worth is determined by something so irrelevant." Maya looked at him, her eyes softening for the briefest of moments. The sadness in her gaze hadn't entirely faded, but there was something else there now. Something like hope, flickering, fragile, but still alive. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of gratitude. She was still hurting, still trying to process everything that had happened, but for the first time, it felt like she wasn't alone. Jack had heard her, Jack had seen her, and for that, Maya felt a little less invisible, a little less unheard, and that was the first step toward healing. Jack's heart weighed heavy in his chest as he listened to Maya's story unfold. Her words, full of pain and disbelief, pierced through him in a way he hadn't expected. He had heard of racism, seen the stories on the news, read about it in articles. But this was different, this was real. It wasn't just a distant issue that existed on paper, it was right in front of him, sitting on the bed, wrapped in a towel and exposed in ways that left Jack with a sense of helplessness that gnawed at him. He could see the raw vulnerability in Maya's eyes, the exhaustion that clung to her every word. She wasn't just an artist. She wasn't just a woman who had faced rejection. She was a human being, a woman whose dreams had been shattered by people who were too blinded by their biases to see her for who she truly was. And in that moment, Jack was struck by how unfair and heartless the world could be, how, despite her obvious talent, despite the love she poured into her art, she was dismissed, not for her skill, but because of something she couldn't change. Maya was crushed, and Jack could feel the weight of her despair. The city of dreams, The city that promised fame, success, and recognition had instead shown her the ugliest side of human nature. She had come to Los Angeles with hopes high and heart full, but the rejection had left her feeling more alone than ever. Jack didn't know what to say. He was at a loss for words, unsure how to make it better. What could he say to someone who had just been told that their worth was defined by the color of their skin? What words could undo the hurt that was so clearly evident in her eyes? He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that there was a place for her in this world. But how could he promise something so uncertain? Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave her in this state of brokenness. He had come into this room by accident, but now, in a strange way, it felt like he was meant to be there, meant to listen, meant to offer what little comfort he could. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Maya," Jack said quietly, his voice laced with sincerity. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. "But you should know that there are people out there who will appreciate your art for what it is. You don't deserve to be treated like this." He meant every word. Maya's art wasn't just a reflection of her creativity, it was a reflection of her soul. No amount of rejection could take that away. She deserved to be seen, to be celebrated, not for her skin color, but for the beauty of what she created. Maya's lips twitched slightly, a faint attempt at a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze remained downcast, as though she couldn't fully accept his words. "I just don't know if I have the strength to keep fighting," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of exhaustion. Jack could feel the tremor in her words, the quiet surrender that threatened to overtake her. He could hear it in the way she spoke, as though she had already begun to doubt herself, as though the cruel rejection had drained the last ounce of hope she had left. It was as if the world had beaten her down so many times that she was no longer sure she had the strength to rise again. "I understand how you feel," Jack said softly, his voice full of empathy. "I've been knocked down before, too. I know what it feels like to pour everything into something, only to have it fall apart. But what you're feeling right now, it doesn't define you. It's just a moment, one bad moment, and even though it feels like everything's crumbling, you're still here, you're still fighting. That's something. You're stronger than you think, Maya." Maya's eyes flickered up to meet his, her expression uncertain. There was a vulnerability in her gaze, a flicker of something like hope, but it was fleeting. She seemed torn, as if part of her wanted to believe him, but another part of her felt too defeated to try again. The walls she had built around herself, the walls that protected her from more hurt, were still up, and Jack could feel the distance between them, a barrier that was difficult to cross. "But what if I'm not?" Maya whispered, almost to herself. "What if all this effort, all this work, was for nothing? What if it's not meant for people like me? I don't know if I have the energy to keep fighting for something that feels so out of reach." Jack could see the battle waging inside her, between her desire to keep going and the overwhelming sense of failure that threatened to consume her. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to change her mind. It wasn't just about offering reassurance, it was about showing her that, even in her weakest moment, she was not alone. That the fight wasn't over. That despite the rejection and pain, she could still find the strength to rise above it. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy," Jack said quietly, his voice steady and filled with an unwavering resolve. "But I believe in you, Maya. I believe in your talent. I've seen it in the way you talk about your art, in the passion you have for it. That's what matters. Not the people who rejected you, not the ones who judged you for the color of your skin. What matters is that you keep going, that you don't let them steal your power." Maya looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time, Jack saw something break through the walls she had built. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but there was a shift in her eyes, a glimmer of something. Maybe hope, maybe the tiniest spark of courage that hadn't been there before. "I don't know if I can keep fighting," she said quietly, the words heavy but soft. but I don't want to give up either." Jack smiled, a small, reassuring smile that wasn't meant to fix everything, but to show her that it was okay to be uncertain, that it was okay to take one step at a time. "You don't have to know everything right now," he said gently. "Just take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and when you're ready, you'll find the strength to keep going." For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the hotel's air conditioning. It was a quiet moment, but it was full of possibility. Jack didn't have the answers, and Maya didn't have all the strength she needed just yet. But in that shared silence, there was something stronger than words. There was understanding. There was connection. Maya looked up at Jack, her gaze softer now, the walls beginning to crumble, piece by piece. The faintest smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Maya stood up slowly, her body stiff with the weight of the emotions that had just been shared. The moment of raw vulnerability, the deep connection between her and Jack, had left her feeling drained, like a part of herself had been laid bare. It was as though everything she had been carrying, the rejection, the hurt, the years of fighting for recognition, had come spilling out in one long breath. And now, the pressure of it all was settling heavily on her shoulders. "I'm going to take a shower," Maya said, her voice soft but tinged with the exhaustion that had begun to take over. The way she spoke, with a quiet, almost resigned tone, made it clear that the weight of the day, of everything that had happened, was pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. Jack, though he wanted to do more, simply nodded. His heart ached for her in ways he hadn't expected. The idea of leaving her alone in her pain felt like a betrayal, but he understood. Sometimes people needed solitude to process everything that had happened. Sometimes you couldn't heal with someone else's eyes on you. "Take your time," Jack said gently, his voice steady and calm, offering the space she needed without hesitation. He didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to push her boundaries. And he certainly didn't want to make her feel like he was forcing his company on her when she needed solitude. Jack could see how drained she was, how every word she had spoken had cost her something. In a way, he understood. He too had found himself in moments of raw emotion, moments where the weight of the world was too much to carry, and all you could do was retreat and give yourself space to breathe, to heal. As Maya walked toward the bathroom, Jack stepped back, giving her the distance she seemed to crave. He knew this wasn't just about needing time to wash off the physical tiredness from the day. It was deeper than that. Maya needed a moment to regroup, to reset herself after the emotional journey they had just shared. She needed time to reflect, to allow the comfort of Jack's words to settle into her heart, to absorb the support he had offered without it feeling too overwhelming. Jack lingered near the door for a moment before he quietly stepped out into the hallway, feeling like a stranger in her intimate space, unsure of what more he could do. He had offered her comfort, but what she truly needed now was peace. And that peace, he knew, could only be found in solitude, away from anyone who might unintentionally cloud her thoughts or steal the stillness she needed to process everything. As he stepped into the hallway, Jack couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn his evening had taken. He had come to this hotel simply for a quiet night of rest after his long trip, but instead he had found something entirely unexpected, a connection with a woman who had been pushed to the edge by the cruel realities of life. The beauty of her spirit had shone through in the way she had talked about her art, her passion, her dreams. Yet despite all of that, the rejection had crushed her in a way that made Jack ache for her. He couldn't fix what had been done to her, but he could be here for her now, in this moment. He could offer her kindness, compassion, and understanding, even if it was just a small part of the healing process. Jack walked slowly down the hallway, letting the silence of the hotel surround him. It was an oddly calming sound, like a soft hum, and it gave him the space to think clearly. He could feel the weight of the emotions still lingering in the air, the echoes of Maya's pain and vulnerability. She had trusted him with her story, and he didn't take that lightly. He couldn't pretend to understand what she was going through, but what he could do was be the person she needed right now. As he walked, his mind kept drifting back to the words Maya had said, how she didn't know if she had the strength to keep fighting. That had hit him hard. The idea of someone as talented and passionate as her questioning whether she had enough left to keep going made him angry. How could anyone be made to feel so small? How could the world be so cruel? He wished, deep down, that he could somehow take that pain away from her, that he could show her just how strong she truly was. But he also understood that healing was a slow process. Sometimes it took time for people to see their own worth. Sometimes it took the right words at the right moment to begin to heal a broken heart. And he had to believe that this moment, this simple, quiet conversation, was one of those steps. He paused by the elevator and turned his gaze back toward the room. He wasn't sure what the next steps would be. Would he and Maya cross paths again? Would she feel stronger after her shower, ready to face the world with renewed courage? Or would she retreat further into herself, unable to face the disappointment and rejection that had been thrust upon her? He couldn't know, he didn't have any answers. But what he did know was that he couldn't simply walk away from this moment. He couldn't leave her alone to face this world without offering her something more than just his sympathy. He had to find a way to remind her of her strength, of her worth, of the things that made her special beyond her skin color and beyond the cruel judgment of those who didn't see the true value in her. A part of Jack, deep down, knew that what Maya needed now was not just healing for her heart, but someone who would remind her that she was more than the pain of the past. She was more than just the disappointment she had faced. She was an artist, a woman with dreams, and no rejection could take that away. The world had rejected her once, but that didn't mean she had to stop fighting for herself. Maya deserved to feel seen, to feel appreciated, and if Jack could help with that, even in some small way, he would. Just as he was lost in thought, he heard the sound of the bathroom door opening behind him. He turned to see Maya emerging, her wet hair cascading around her face in loose waves, her skin glowing from the warm water that had soothed her tired body. She looked different, more at peace perhaps, or maybe just more centered. She looked at him then, her gaze meeting his with a softness that was both vulnerable and steady at once. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still a little shaky but filled with genuine gratitude. "For listening. For not walking away." Jack smiled at her, his heart swelling with affection for this woman he had only just met, yet felt so deeply connected to. "Of course," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I'm glad you're feeling a little better." Maya nodded, and for the first time since Jack had walked into the room, a real smile, albeit small, appeared on her face. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in that moment, Jack realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, the smallest moments of connection, could be the ones that made the most difference. The healing wasn't complete yet. Maya still had a long way to go. But with every word, every step, she was finding her strength again. And Jack would be there, whether for a moment or a lifetime, reminding her that she was worthy of every dream she had. When Maya stepped out of the bathroom, it was as if she had shed not only the physical grime of the day, but also the weight of her emotions. Her hair, damp and tousled, framed her face in soft waves, the strands catching the dim light as she walked into the room. Her skin, still glistening with droplets of water, seemed to hold an inner glow, one that came not just from the hot shower, but from the peace she was beginning to find within herself. There was something different in her eyes, a renewed sense of determination that hadn't been there when she had first shared her painful story with Jack. She no longer looked as if she was drowning in her sadness. No. This woman walking back into the room was standing taller. Not just physically, but in a way that suggested she was gathering the strength to rise above everything she had been through. She was not just surviving anymore. She was beginning to reclaim the person she was before the world had tried to break her down. Jack, who had been standing by the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of city lights stretching below, turned at the sound of her footsteps. His eyes softened as he took in the sight of her, no longer just the woman who had been rejected and broken, but someone beginning to shine once again. The moment was almost cinematic, as though time had slowed, allowing Jack to witness the change within her in real time. Maya walked over to him, her steps measured but purposeful, and sat down beside him on the edge of the bed. There was no rush, no need for words that could fill the silence. The weight of the moment hung in the air between them, both of them aware that something had shifted, something profound and meaningful. After a few moments of quiet, Maya spoke softly, her voice tinged with sincerity. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability that felt both fragile and strong at once. "Thank you for not treating me like an outsider, for listening. Not everyone does." Jack's heart fluttered at her words. He could sense the weight behind them, the vulnerability she had shown by opening up to him, trusting him with her pain, something so deeply personal. Her gratitude was palpable, but so was the depth of the unspoken bond between them. In that moment, Jack understood that this wasn't just about being a good person or offering kind words. It was about making someone feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. It was about restoring the belief that they were worthy of being heard. Jack's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. His eyes reflected sincerity as he turned his body slightly toward her, offering her his full attention. "I believe in you," he said, his voice low but firm, a strength in his words that Maya could feel deep within her. "I don't care what anyone else thinks. Your art matters. You matter." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. In a world where rejection often felt like a death sentence to a dream, Jack's belief in her was like a lifeline. Maya had spent so long internalizing the doubt others had cast on her. But in this quiet moment, Jack was offering her something she hadn't had in a long time, a reminder of her worth, a reminder that her dreams weren't just valid, they were valuable. Maya's chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat as she heard those words. She had expected sympathy, even pity, but Jack had given her something far more precious. He had given her hope. It was a hope she didn't realize she had lost until now, a hope that had been buried under the weight of rejection and discrimination, yet was reignited by this stranger's kindness. She turned her head away for a moment, trying to keep the tears at bay. It wasn't that she didn't want to cry, it was that for the first time she felt she could allow herself to. She had been holding on to so much pain, so much uncertainty. But now, in Jack's presence, there was a quiet calm, a comfort that told her it was okay to feel. It was okay to be human. Taking a slow breath, Maya finally allowed herself to speak again. I don't even know how to explain how much your words mean to me." Her voice was soft but steady now, and she turned to face him fully. "In the past few days, I felt so alone, like nothing I did could ever be good enough. Like I'm always fighting a battle I can never win, but right now, sitting here with you, I don't feel like I'm fighting alone anymore. I feel like maybe I can keep going." Jack's heart swelled with something he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just the satisfaction of knowing he had said the right thing. It was the understanding that sometimes what people needed most wasn't grand gestures or promises of success. It was simply the reminder that they were enough, as they were, no matter what the world had told them. "You can keep going, Maya," Jack said, his voice full of conviction. "You're not alone. I'm here, and I know there are others out there who will see you for who you truly are, the incredible, talented woman who deserves all the success in the world. Don't let the small minds and the cruel hearts stop you. Your art is so much bigger than that." Maya's eyes softened, a quiet peace beginning to wash over her. She had spent so long doubting her ability to push forward, but Jack's words were breaking through the walls of doubt she had built around herself. For the first time in days, she felt lighter, like a weight was being lifted from her chest. She had never expected to find this sense of solace in a chance encounter with a man who had no idea the impact he would have on her life. And yet, here they were, in a hotel room, sharing a moment that felt like it had the power to change the course of everything. For a long time, Maya had believed that the world would judge her and her work based on her race, her appearance, and her background. She had seen the harsh rejections and the dismissive glances, and she had internalized those opinions. But Jack was showing her a different reality, one where her worth was not measured by what others thought, but by the passion and soul she poured into her art. In that moment, she realized that she didn't have to fight for a place in the world. She already had a place. She had always had one. As Maya sat beside Jack, her body relaxing into the cushions of the bed, she couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. Gratitude not just for Jack's kindness, but for the reminder that hope could still exist, even after disappointment. In his words, in his unwavering belief in her, she found a strength she had almost forgotten she had. The moment hung between them, a silent understanding that whatever happened next, Maya was no longer alone. She had been seen, she had been heard, and she had been believed in. And sometimes that's all it takes to start a new chapter, to find the courage to keep going, even when the world tells you to stop. "Thank you," Maya whispered again, this time with more depth, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Jack simply nodded, his heart full. "You don't have to thank me. Just keep being you, Maya. That's all you need to do." And as they sat there together, in the quiet warmth of that room, something beautiful began to unfold, something that neither of them could have anticipated. It wasn't just about the art or the rejection, it was about the human connection, the shared belief in something greater than the pain and obstacles of the moment. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, a kind word could reignite the flame of hope and strength. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they needed to keep moving forward. The air in the room hung heavy as Jack's words echoed between them. Maya sat still, her body unmoving as she processed what had just been said. It felt like a dream, a fleeting moment where everything she'd fought for, all the struggles she'd endured in silence, seemed to come together, but deep inside doubt crept in. She had heard offers like this before, empty words meant to comfort, hollow gestures from people who were long gone by the time the reality hit. Jack, however, wasn't like those people. His words were slow, deliberate, and filled with something Maya hadn't felt in a long time. Sincerity. He didn't just say things to make her feel better. No, this was different. There was conviction in his voice, and it was evident that he meant every word. "I want to help you," Jack said again, his tone now quieter, more intimate. "I have some connections in the art world. If you trust me, I can help get your work in front of the right people." Maya's heart skipped a beat, and she could feel the hesitation rising within her. Could she trust him? The world had let her down so many times before. Was this just another person offering a glimmer of hope, only to take it away later? It was hard to believe, hard to imagine someone truly wanting to help her after so many years of rejection, of being told she wasn't enough. Her eyes met Jack's, and she saw the truth there. She didn't need to question the sincerity of his offer. She could see it in the way his gaze held hers, the way he wasn't looking at her with pity, but with respect. He was offering her a chance, a real chance. "Why would you want to help someone like me?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. She had been overlooked, discarded, and cast aside so many times in her life. The rejection from the gallery that day was just the latest chapter in a long book of failed dreams. She wanted to believe him, but the scars of her past were deep. "I'm just another artist with a dream. There are so many others out there who are more qualified, more marketable than I am. Why would you waste your time on me?" The question stung Jack. He understood why she was asking. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the weight of every rejection, every moment of feeling invisible. He had been there too. He had faced his own demons, his own battles with being underestimated, with feeling like nothing more than a number in a sea of faces. The sting of being overlooked, of being made to feel small, was something Jack knew all too well. Jack shifted in his chair and leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated," he said, his words carrying the weight of his own experiences. "I know what it's like to feel like no one sees you for who you truly are, to be judged before you even get a chance to show what you're capable of. I've been there, Maya." Maya's breath caught in her throat. There was something about the way Jack spoke with such raw honesty that made her feel as if he truly understood. His voice held the weight of his own struggles, his own fight against the world's judgments. And for the first time, someone was offering her more than just sympathy. He was offering her the kind of understanding that came from personal experience. "I've fought for recognition," Jack continued, his voice steady, "and I want to help you prove them wrong. Your art matters, Maya. It's more than just colors on a canvas or shapes in a frame. It's a story. It's your voice. The world needs to hear it. People need to see who you are, and I want to help make that happen." Maya sat still, her thoughts swirling. She had wanted this for so long. She had worked tirelessly, pouring her soul into every brushstroke, every piece of art that reflected her innermost thoughts and feelings. But the art world, as she had learned, was not kind to people like her. It didn't care about the depth of her work, the passion that fueled it. It only cared about whether you fit into their narrow, preconceived ideas of success. Jack's words pierced through the fog of doubt in her mind. Maybe he's right. Maybe there is someone out there who will truly appreciate my work for what it is. The thought was almost too much to bear. Her heart raced as she grappled with the possibility that Jack wasn't just talking to be kind. He was speaking from a place of genuine belief in her. "I don't know what to say," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. The weight of his offer was too much for her to process all at once. She wanted to believe, but the fear of being let down again was strong. She had been down this road before, and it had always led to disappointment. Could she really trust Jack? Could she take this step, or would it end in another crushing blow? Jack's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. He could see the fear in her, fear that had been built over years of disappointment, of rejection, of feeling like her worth didn't matter. He knew it wouldn't be easy for Maya to accept his offer. She had been hurt too many times. Too many people had told her she wasn't good enough. "You don't have to say anything right now," Jack said, his voice gentle yet unwavering. "Take your time. Just know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and if you decide you want to take this step, I'll be here to help you. No strings attached. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know that there are people who will see you for who you are. Your art matters." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Maya felt the walls inside her begin to crumble just a little. For so long she had kept herself locked away, guarding her heart from the hurt she had experienced. But Jack's words, his kindness, were like a soft light breaking through the cracks. The promise of something real, something lasting, began to take root in her heart. Maya finally looked up at Jack, her eyes filled with a quiet hope she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me. I don't know if I can believe in myself yet, but hearing you say that, it gives me hope. It makes me feel like maybe I can do this." Jack's smile was warm, reassuring. "You don't have to believe in yourself all at once, Maya. Take it one step at a time. Just know that I'm here for you, and I believe in you, even if you can't see it yet. That's enough for now." For the first time in a long time, Maya felt like someone truly cared. Someone wasn't just telling her what she wanted to hear. They were offering her a chance, a real chance to make her dreams a reality. Jack wasn't just offering her a pathway to success. He was offering her a chance to be seen. He was offering her the chance to stand in a world that had so often told her she didn't belong, and say, "I matter. My art matters." The thought was overwhelming, and Maya felt tears sting her eyes once again, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. Jack's kindness, his belief in her, had opened a door she thought was forever locked. "I'll think about it," Maya said, her voice shaky but full of emotion. I really will. I don't know what will happen, but I'm starting to believe maybe I'm worth the chance." Jack nodded, his expression full of pride. "That's all I ask. Take your time, but know that I'm here when you're ready, whenever you need me." Maya took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The future seemed a little less daunting now. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a partner in her corner, and that was enough to spark a light inside her, a light that she hadn't felt in years. She smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you," she whispered again. "Thank you for everything." And as Jack left the room, closing the door softly behind him, Maya sat in the quiet, her heart a little lighter, her dreams a little closer. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to walk it alone, and that, more than anything, gave her the courage to take the next step. Months had passed since that life-changing moment when Jack Stevens had walked into the wrong hotel room, and everything had shifted for Maya. With Jack's unwavering support, Maya's art had found a place in the world it had never known before. No longer a hidden treasure, her works were now celebrated for their raw emotion, their depth, and the beauty she had once doubted could exist in a world that hadn't recognized her. It was surreal, almost like a dream. At first, things had been slow. Maya had struggled, trying to make a name for herself, while still nursing the wounds of rejection. But Jack's belief in her had given her the confidence to push through the pain. He had given her a platform, a voice when she didn't have one, a chance when she thought it was all over. And now here she was, standing in a gallery, her art on display, her soul woven into every piece. She had gone from a woman who thought she wasn't good enough to one who now knew her worth. Slowly but surely, the world was beginning to see her the way she had always hoped. Maya had always poured herself into her work, into each painting, each brushstroke, as though it would be the one that would make someone truly see her. But it had been years before that ever happened. The rejections had been soul-crushing, the no's deafening, until she had given up hope that anyone would ever value her in the way she deserved. Jack had shattered that mindset. His support, his genuine kindness, and his insistence that her art had value had opened doors she never imagined would be possible. Now, with each exhibit, each new gallery show, Maya felt herself growing stronger, her confidence blossoming with every moment. This evening, the city lights outside the gallery bathed everything in a golden glow. Maya was standing near one of her paintings, looking at it as though she were seeing it for the first time. It was a piece that represented her journey, a mix of chaotic strokes and calming hues, a reflection of the turbulence of her life, followed by the peace she now sought. The energy in the room buzzed, but her mind was momentarily lost in the piece she had created. Suddenly, she noticed a figure entering the gallery. The familiar silhouette made her heart leap in her chest. It was Jack. He stood tall, his presence always commanding, but this time it was different. He wasn't just a businessman in a suit. He wasn't just the man who had made an unintentional intrusion into her life. No, now he was someone who had played an integral part in the woman she had become, the woman who had found her voice, her place, and her worth. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the entire gallery seemed to fade away. Maya couldn't help but feel the deep sense of gratitude that she had carried with her ever since that night, when she thought her world had shattered. Jack had been there for her in ways no one else had, not just as a supporter of her art, but as a true friend, someone who believed in her when she had lost her own belief. As Jack walked toward her, his expression softened into a smile that radiated warmth and understanding. There was no need for words at first. They simply stood there, looking at each other across the distance, an unspoken bond linking them. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was gentle, yet filled with pride. "I knew this moment would come," he said, his eyes scanning the gallery as if it were a reflection of everything Maya had accomplished. Maya smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had worked so hard for this. But it was more than just the recognition. It was the knowing that she had found her purpose, the truth that she wasn't just another artist in the crowd, but someone whose art spoke with the depth of experience, with the truth of who she was. "You were right," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. She felt a lump in her throat as she looked at Jack, her eyes filled with both gratitude and newfound strength. "You helped me find my voice again. I'm not just an artist anymore. I'm someone with a purpose." Jack's eyes softened, his smile wide and full of warmth. His face held the pride of a mentor, a friend who had witnessed Maya's transformation firsthand. "No, Maya," he said, his voice full of quiet sincerity. "You always had that purpose. You just needed someone to remind you." Maya felt the weight of those words settle into her heart, and for the first time in a long time, she truly believed them. She had always carried that purpose inside her, but Jack had shown her how to believe in it, how to believe in herself. She realized then that sometimes we need someone to help us find the light inside of us, someone to help us see past the darkness that clouds our vision. Jack had been that someone. As the conversation continued, the two of them shared stories about the journey they had taken, the struggles they had overcome, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Maya shared her experiences of how the art world had once rejected her, how she had almost given up on her dream. Jack shared the moments in his own life when he had felt doubt, when he had questioned his own worth. It was in those conversations, in the small, intimate exchanges, that Maya realized how deeply her life had been impacted by one act of kindness. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like her art didn't matter, like she didn't matter. But now, as she stood beside Jack in that gallery, surrounded by people admiring her work, she knew that none of those feelings of insignificance could hold her anymore. Jack's belief in her had helped her realize that she was more than just an artist. She was a person with something valuable to offer, something the world needed to see. The evening continued with laughter and celebration, and Maya greeted guests, sharing stories about her art, her inspiration, and the meaning behind each piece. But in her heart, she knew that this moment, this night, wasn't just about the recognition, the accolades, or the praise. It was about the journey. It was about remembering how far she had come and how much she had fought to get here. As the night wore on and the last guests began to leave, Maya found herself once again standing beside Jack. The gallery was quiet now, the walls echoing with a sense of peace, the kind that comes only after a long battle. She looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for being the person who helped me see that I could do this. I would never have gotten here without you." Jack smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "Maya, I didn't do anything. You did this. You took the leap. You fought for your dreams, and you've shown the world what you're capable of. All I did was help you see it." Maya felt her heart swell with emotion, and she knew in that moment that the true gift wasn't just the art, the success, or the recognition. The true gift was the connection they had built, the understanding, the kindness, and the support that had allowed her to grow, to rise, and to become the woman she was meant to be. And as they stood there together, Maya realized that kindness, empathy, and the willingness to see someone for who they truly were, those were the things that could change lives. Jack had taught her that. In a world that often judged too harshly, the simplest acts of compassion could make all the difference. Maya looked out at the city, her heart full of hope for the future. She wasn't just an artist, she was someone with a purpose. And no matter what the world threw at her, she knew she would never again let anyone make her feel invisible.